welcome to Views on News. I'm Jawad. Tehami. After intense negotiations, the Pakistani authorities and the International Monetary Fund reached a staff-level agreement for a $3 billion in the standby arrangement for the next 9 months. Later on, we saw the executive board of the IMF also approved this, which was termed as a huge step forward for the stabilization of Pakistan's economy. Now, as per the IMF, the program will focus on 4 key areas that include the implementation of fiscal year 24 budget, return to market determined exchange rate, an appropriately tight monetary policy aimed at disinflation, and the last but not the least, the progress on structural reforms. Now, on Tuesday, the International Monetary Fund released a report regarding Pakistan's economy, which says that Pakistan's economy had been rocked by significant shocks, which include floods, the Ukraine conflict, as well as the fiscal and external pressures. It also says Pakistan's economic challenges are complex and multifaceted, and risks are exceptionally high. The IMF goes on to say that addressing them requires steadfast implementation of the agreed policies, as well as the continued financial support from the external partners. It has also hinted at a possible successor program upon the completion of this particular standby arrangement. The IMF has also made some forecasts regarding the future course of Pakistan's economy, which we will be taking up for discussion in today's show. For that, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Ali Salman in the studio. He is Executive Director at the Policy Research Institute of Market Economy. Mr. Ali Salman, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. On Skype at the same time, we are being joined by Mr. Shikoh Atif. He is Senior Economist and Professor of Economics at the York University in Canada. Mr. Shikoh Atif, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Ali Salman. And now this particular report that was released by the IMF talks in details regarding the kind of risks the Pakistan economy might be facing in the future that requires to address them. It requires the strict implementation of the agreed policies. Let's begin with the fiscal side first. What's your understanding of that?
I think on the fiscal side, the situation is quite clear. As far as budget is concerned, Pakistan has promised relatively surplus budget in terms of when we talk about primary budget deficit is concerned. So that is reassuring. Obviously, the challenge is how do we maintain and how do we stick to it. The other side of the fiscal policy, there are of course two sides. One is the tax collection targets and the public spending. Now, on the public spending, I do not see a strong emphasis in terms of control and discipline, especially on cutting down on wasteful expenditures in the program itself, which I was expecting to see more. I see more emphasis on the tax collection side, which has been historically consistent with the IMF program, but that only would address the collection issue. And unless we address the spending part, I think we are not going to achieve the target of a primary surplus. And the other part is that one thing which is, I think, not fully addressed is the tax reform issue. As you know, that we have been advocating about a broader tax reforms. We have been advocating for reduction of tax rates and not increase in tax rates, wherein the program itself does not stipulate that. Program just talks about increasing the tax revenue and increasing the tax base. And the government is doing it. Government is just looking at the existing taxpayers and looking at increasing the tax revenue from them. Very lately we have heard that IMF has indicated and has recommended rather that the government should also look into the untaxed sectors like agriculture and real estate. So that's a positive sign. I think on the fiscal side, this will be a major challenge because these two sectors, real estate and agriculture, are largely undocumented and untaxed at the moment. So this is going to be a test of government administrative skill and also political will to implement these reforms. I think these are the fiscal issues right now.
Of course, we understand that to increase the tax base in order to generate more revenue, in order to deal with the challenges is of utmost importance. What makes you say to reduce the tax income?
Well, if the tax rates in Pakistan, if you talk about income tax, if you talk about the corporate profits, taxation of corporate profit, or sales tax, or even the import duties are very high when we compare with the region. A company in Pakistan has to currently pay more than 50% of its income in taxation. So that's huge disincentive for any existing business. I think this serves as a major deterrent for any new investor to come to Pakistan. So this needs to be reduced significantly, and we need to minimize the exemptions. And this is acknowledged in the program. The program says that we need to minimize the exemption, which is a good sign. But unless we have to do both, we have to decrease the tax rate so that more people are encouraged to become a part of the tax base. One example, if you look at general sales tax in Pakistan, there are about at least 4 million established enterprises in Pakistan which are sort of registered in some ways or other, and we have hardly 25,000 which are paying general sales tax, because the sales tax is very high, and we believe that if we can reduce that rate, the number of the tax paying enterprises can be increased significantly.
So when this particular program we talk about it, it categorically says that the fiscal year 24 budget aims to set in a gradual fiscal improvement with getting more taxes. So what does that mean?
So that essentially means that, as I said, the traditional focus of the government is on tax collection target. So every year we hear that FBR has been given a tax collection target. Now that is a problematic target, targeting itself, because we should be looking at balanced budget. We should be looking at reduction of the fiscal deficit as a holistic measure, rather than just doing the tax collection improvement. Obviously, Pakistan needs to improve the tax to GDP ratio, but Pakistan also needs to significantly reduce the public expenditure side, especially on the state-owned enterprises, which are still largely unaddressed.
So where to start from when we talk about the better governance of the state-owned enterprises? It is one of those very 4 key points that have been mentioned by the IMF in its report also.
Well, we need to go back to basic, and we need to restart the privatization, which is practically halted for last 10 or 15 years. And each successive government has shied away from the difficult agenda of privatization under one pretext or another. And the previous government, the PTI government, started doing the sovereign fund, started doing sort of bringing the SOEs under one fund, which did not work at all. Current government did not get much time to improve upon or to restart the privatization program, but I guess that the history of both PMLN and Pakistan People's Party in the previous eras have been very pro-privatization. I think the thing we need to start is to really move away from this notion that we can somehow fix these state-owned enterprises. Most of these 200 odd state-owned enterprises unfortunately cannot be fixed anymore. So either we have to close them or we have to privatize them. Only those SOEs should be allowed to function which are serving some kind of public good, which are difficult to be served by the private sector, including, by the way, media corporation, for instance. Otherwise, in most of the commercial domain, I think we definitely need to take very, very hard measures. And these measures are not there. For instance, if you look at the budget, the privatization proceeds is a very insignificant amount in the budget. So that means that the government has not planned any privatization in this fiscal year, in a meaningful manner. And instead, what we hear is a new policy draft. Actually, tomorrow we are doing a consultative session on privatization, and this SOE policy draft, which is available on Ministry of Finance website, says that the government can actually establish new SOEs if the federal government thinks that the markets cannot be captured somehow, the private sector. Now this is definitely worrisome, and it will add to the already fiscal burden on the government.
Mr. Shikoh, Atif has joined. I'll come back to you regarding
Sure.
what are the impediments regarding the privatization process in order to improve the governance of the state-owned enterprises. Mr. Shikoh, Atif, thank you very much for joining in at Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. We know that the intense negotiations took place between Pakistani authorities and the IMF for this new standby arrangement of $3 billion. Now, there are four key areas. Let's talk about the first one, the implementation of the fiscal year 24 budget, talking about creating the fiscal space, the kind of tax measures the government has taken in this particular budget, your understanding of those.
You know, they've done a pretty good job of doing their best within the circumstances, although 50% of the economy still remains untaxed, and that is agriculture and the retail space, and that's 50% of the economy, and they pay only 2 to 3% of the tax burden. So they have not done a pretty good job of enlarging the tax base. However, they have increased the taxation on...
Pardon for the interjection over here. I'll come back to you to discuss this later. Mr. Ali Salman, when we talk about the second key point that has been mentioned by IMF, that is return to market-determined exchange rate.
So what has happened in last 1.5 years? That the government has increased its intervention in the market, in the determination of exchange rate. Although it is not officially acknowledged, but I think that there are signs that government has, for instance, by trying to slow down the import payments and other administrative measures through banks, through state bank, there are indications that this has been the policy. Now, the government is now saying that we have stopped chasing a target in terms of the rupee or dollar conversion rate, and we have allowed the market forces to function. And IMF program is saying that we must demonstrate the commitment. And at this point, they have actually added a target, and the target is, and the indicator is, that the difference between the open market and the interbank market of dollar should not be more than 1.25%, which is a very narrow gap. Historically, in last 25 or 30 years, we had solved this problem, but the currency market is very difficult to control, particularly if you don't have the investments coming in, or the deposits coming in, as happened in terms of the forex reserves in last 1 year. So IMF program is saying that we need to stop this intervention and accept the market realities. Now, obviously, when you open up the market after a long time of control, then the speculators get into the space, and they would exploit that space which will be created for some time. I think we should be prepared for that. We should be prepared for some volatility and allow the exchange rate to be settled. But along with that, of course, then the other issue is, then we can talk about it later, is the restrictions on the import, because these two measures are very closely related, and IMF has, I think, rightly highlighted those measures.
Right. Mr. Shikoh, Atif, please continue where you left from. Unfortunately, we were having a little bit of distortion regarding the tax measures in this fiscal year 24 budget.
Certainly. So there is that issue with agriculture and retail. However, there is this major issue which could have been addressed in this budget, and is of the inherent conflict between the provincial taxation and the federal taxation. And agriculture, no one touches it. Whenever we come to this issue, everyone says, okay, well, it's a provincial matter, so they should tax, the federal says. So that also has to be resolved. Also with taxation, another area left open in this, as far as taxation is concerned, is that 60% of whatever is taxed is given by the federal government to the provinces. and the federal government is only left with 40% to do everything else within. So if the NFC award is not looked at again as a nation, if we don't look at the NFC award again and try to come to some semblance of reasonableness, this is going to be a problem. We just cannot afford to sustain ourselves like this. One other area about agricultural taxation that I can verify with you is that the previous chairman of Federal Reserve Board, Shabbar Zaidi, was, did try to touch agriculture. And then a group of 40 MNAs led by an MNA, according to him, led by PTI, approached him and said, no, it's a bad idea. And I'm just quoting him word for word. So agricultural taxation, we failed to increase the base. However, we have done a few good things. The petrol levy is going to give us about 79 billion rupees. Additionally, the 5% or raising the levy to 60, and then the average will come to be about 5 rupees. So that is going to give us something. And then there is going to be an additional 300 billion that from the salary class. So we've done a pretty good job, but we could always do better. There is also taxation on soft drinks and colas. That is another substantial amount. So as far as taxation goes, they've done a pretty good job, but they certainly could do a little bit better. But within the political realities, and they are sort of looking at the elections as well, which is always a reality in our. They did as well as they possibly could. The one good thing that the IMF actually nudged us towards was there has been a sort of an increase in the Benazir income support program, which is a good thing. There has been a little bit of more given towards, which is a passion of our Prime Minister, which is amazing, which is, empowering youth with technology and that laptop program. I certainly am a big proponent of that, and I absolutely believe in that. So that's what I would say at this present time.
Would you shed a little bit of light on the second key point as mentioned by the IMF, return to the market-determined exchange rate?
Certainly. I think this obsession that the West has with the market-determined exchange rate, I think sometimes they take it a little bit too far. I think this is one good thing that they've done, there, which is decreasing the band between the interbank exchange rate and the open market exchange rate. That's a good thing that they've limited the distance and the discrepancy between that. In this one regard, let me, if I may, say something about the media as well. I think the media all across various factions helps to create this open market. When they keep reporting in the interbank, it was this, but it was trading as this. Now, when they say trading as this, that actually gets a price of its own. So I think the media should try to stay away from interbank is this and the open market is this, because it gives it is sort of a sales pitch for taking the dollar's value higher. So that's one thing that I would say. The dollar has I've always been saying that the value of the dollar is not as much a Pakistan rupee story as it is an international dollar story. So the dollar has actually been gaining value against almost all international currencies. Yes, Pakistan could do better with its exports, and especially in the IT sector. But this is essentially a dollar story, and dollar is highly valued right now. And hopefully, with our balance of payment crisis sort of under control, with all the money coming into Pakistan, following the Prime Minister's excellent initiative and personal input into getting the IMF program, this is also all going to stabilize. But over-reliance on the market, and then and IMF saying to State Bank to stay away from it, and I just think it's overblown. And all the successful economies follow a little bit of a balance between the two. Like, for example, China. what they do is they follow the market, but they also have their own priorities in mind. So it's not a bad thing for the State Bank to sort of have some sort of control on what suits the Pakistan economy. So that is what I would say on this subject.
Right. Mr. Salman, when we talk about certain predictions regarding Pakistan's future, Pakistan's economy future course, the IMF in its report talks about inflation, also saying that headline inflation is to lower from June onwards. But the pressures projected to remain elevated in fiscal year 2024. Now, it directly relates to an appropriately tight monetary policy aimed at disinflation. What's your understanding of that?
So first of all, let me make one quick clarification on when we were talking about my colleague, Mr. Shikoh, was addressing the issue of exchange rate and government control. I'd like just to remind the audience that this is what actually we practice. We had actually the control back in last 1 year. We had actually State Bank, through its instructions to the commercial banks, some level of influence and control was actually employed. Right? So, but we have seen the result and how market responded to those controls, and the gaps were continuously increasing. So I think the market signals are very important, and we need to just look into that, like why market is responding in certain way. But coming back to the main question which you asked about the IMF projections in terms of the inflation and its rate, its increase in a relationship with the interest rate. Now again, this is a textbook approach, I do admit that. And this comes from an economic model where the leveraging of businesses is norm, which is in our case is not most of the business are leveraged. Also, if you look at the house stock, significant majority, almost 98%, are in the equity domain. They are not leveraged by mortgage facilities. So it means that the impact of a change in the interest rate in our economy is not going to be vast, and as happens in, let's say, an economy which is leveraged, let's say the US economy. Having said that, I think there is importance of interest rate control when we see excessive money supply, when we see particularly government becoming major borrower in the market of loanable funds. About 60 to 70% of these funds, commercial credit, goes to the government. So obviously this has implication in terms of the inflation. So that's what I think the program is saying, that some level of discipline is important. Now it will, on the other hand, it will increase the cost of debt servicing, which we are seeing. And also the interest rate as an instrument would have its limitation in bringing the prices down, because not all the increase in the price increase can be explained by the money supply. So money supply is very important part of the story, but then there are cost constraints, there are, as you mentioned in the very beginning, supply chain issues, war in Ukraine, restrictions on import, which we are just lifting. So there are other issues which, of course, just the monetary policy cannot address. So I think this is something we have to look more carefully in the future and more holistically, rather than just looking at from a monetary angle.
Right, Mr. Shikoh, Atif, your understanding regarding the projection which has been made by IMF regarding headline inflation to lower from June onwards, but the pressures are projected to remain elevated in fiscal year 24. That relates to that very key point already mentioned by IMF after the approval of this particular standby arrangement, an appropriate tight monetary policy aimed at disinflation.
Yeah, I've always said that IMF is amazing, and we are grateful for their assistance. Absolutely. However, this overemphasis on the monetary policy as a sort of hedge on inflation, they just completely fail to understand the country-specific nature of an economy. and where the inflation is coming from. They fail to understand the role of Artis. They fail to understand how we operate. Because I work closely with various international organizations, so that's why their misunderstanding about what is a cost push inflation and what is a demand pull inflation, and it's just to pick up a textbook and say raise your interest rates and it'll close in what it does, unfortunately, is it brings the business environment. It has a tremendous negative impact on the business sentiment in a country. And a country like Pakistan, we have our own challenges as we move forward. I am not a big proponent of that. And every time, so IMF just asked us to add 1% on, so 21 to 22%. Every time we raise that, and this is according to the research done by NUST University, what they calculated was every time that 1% is added on, $2.5 billion is added to the loan amount owed by Pakistan to various institutions. So all in all, I mean, I'm not a big proponent of the monetary policy. However, that this kind of discipline is absolutely necessary, and the 10 major instructions that the IMF has given, absolutely we must follow them, and they've given an additional 13 performance-based instructions. The big challenge with this situation, with the situation we find ourselves in, is the implementation of this process that they've laid out to us is going to be done by 3 different governments, with the present government, with the caretaker government, and after the elections. So that is the one major challenge that Pakistan faces at the present moment, as far as the implementation of the program is concerned.
Salman, do you have anything to add to this particular thing, the impact on the business environment, the rise, the increase in this monetary policy from 21 to 22%?
I think I agree. Of course, the cost of capital, when you look at the interest rate, it becomes an important consideration in investment decision, in cost of obtaining a working capital, from the banks. It all adds up to the cost, and it will ultimately impact the balance sheet and the income statement as well in terms of the banking. But I think there are other also considerations when we talk about business sentiment. We have to talk about political stability. We have to talk about policy continuity. We also have to talk about the exchange rate, because that's an important part of the industrial processes. Our exports and production are heavily dependent on imports. So interest rate is one of the factors. So I cannot deny that. But of course, there are other factors which we need to look into in terms of the business environment.
What about the impact on debt servicing also?
Yeah, so there is an impact. You can say that an increase in the interest rate would actually increase the total, the debt borrowing, the borrowing. But it can also. The question is, will it also work the other way around? Of course, it's a calculation. For instance, when you are reducing the interest rate, and it has happened in last few years also, the interest rate was increased significantly, and then it was brought down, right? So it touched about 18% a few years back when PTI government was coming in, and it was significantly brought down to 6 or 7% in the previous time, in the previous government. So I think we need to look at the interest rate not just from not from a fiscal position point of view, but largely from inflation management point of view. So my view remains more in line with current understanding that this is a useful tool for signaling from the central bank in terms of managing the inflation expectations. That's my view.
Right. When we increase this interest rate, when we talk about in terms of debt servicing, is it applicable on the principal amount or the interest that we pay on the principal amount?
It is applicable on the overall amount when we talk about the impact of the interest rate.
Right. Now we're talking about the structural reforms, the energy sector. What areas should Pakistani authorities should start from?
So there is a major concern raised by IMF in terms of the energy sector reforms. I think one key indicator of the problem is the rising circular debt, both in the electricity market and also now in the gas sector. The usual, the conventional answer from the government is that, okay, we are supposed to do the structural reforms, but instead of doing structural reforms, they would opt to increase the tariffs, which they have done just recently, right? So that's the easier way to manage the crisis. The structural reforms mean that we have excessive losses in the transmission and distribution sector, which needs to be reduced significantly. It also means that we also are offering cross subsidies that needs to be minimized or eliminated, which become bulk of our subsidies in the budget. We also have this formula in which there is the discos, the distribution companies, they're allowed to pass on any increase in their cost, whether the cost is justified or not, into the tariff. So that has to be changed into a competitive tariff. And for instance, we just heard from APTMA, the Textile Association, that they have demanded that they can pay the tariff as per the cost, but they should not be burdened with, let's say, the cross subsidy or inefficiencies of the system. So when we talk about reforms, we talk about, for instance, how can we bring these distribution companies away from government control to a more market-based discipline. So that's not happening. We also need to talk about the importance of the energy mix and how do we improve the energy mix by to bring the overall cost of the energy down. So these are the difficult decisions. Particularly, the most important challenge is in the distribution sector, which is the weakest link in the entire market.
That happens to be the line losses primarily.
That's right, line losses,
so
but also the management.
How to address that?
Well, first of all, you need to, of course, if you look at, for instance, the privatization of Karachi Electric as a case study. Now, of course, there are mixed views on that. So some people are in favor of privatization because of looking at the reduction in the line losses in Karachi Electric, but some are very critical, and because it's a unique case where they have production and distribution combined as a vertical entity. So my view is that market-based approach and a competitive approach, restructuring of the distribution market is important. That will ultimately lead to reduction of line losses, but it is a gradual process.
So what about the recoveries? How to improve on that?
So once you I think improve the management, currently it's politicized. It's very also the influence of bureaucracy is there. You need to bring in technology. You need to automate the systems. So that will help the recovery, but that will also help a reduction of the losses. Recovery ratio is not that bad. It's in well-functioning discos, it's more than 90%. But the losses is more than 20%. So it means net recovery is less than 70% if you look at the picture holistically. So that's something which we need to address, because all of us which are paying our electricity bill regularly are paying for that 30% losses in the system.
Right. Mr. Shikoh, Atif, what's your view regarding the impediments when it comes to reducing the circular debt and how to address them?
Well, I'd like to mention 50 agreements that we have undertaken, and that put a tremendous burden on the foreign exchange reserve, because those agreements are sort of done in US dollar terms. 50 agreements that we have undertaken, 55 agreements with IPPs, independent power producers, and those are have occurred over a long period of time, and those situations have changed now. And let me just say, I really find that Mossadegh Malik is doing a pretty good job right now developing our international relations in this space. As far as collecting the bad debts, so those, if you have a moment, I'll just talk a little bit about independent power producers. Those agreements are all done in US dollar terms, and they are sort of in such a disarray now because of the valuation of the US dollar and our inability to sometimes. So those 50 agreements have to really be renegotiated with these independent power producers, which are foreign in some cases and domestic influential people in many cases. So for us, that puts a tremendous burden on this energy sector. As far as Optima and these other my view is that we have tried to subsidize these the textile manufacturers, and yes, it is hard for them because all other countries in our region, even in our region, get electricity at about 60% of what we pay and on an average. So yes, it is tough for them. However, the contribution that they've made to the net export of Pakistan, I don't know if I'm not certain if it's that beneficial for us, and IMF has done a pretty good job of sort of enforcing that we have to keep an eye on subsidizing entities like that. So I hope there is some way forward on that. The one great thing that is happening this time around, over the past 4 years, every single year the mistake that we were making was we were ordering wrong. So our fossil fuels, we will sort of ordering inaccurately and miscounting our LNG reserves, and at the last moment that we'd run to the market and get the fuel at a much higher price. So a lot of efficiency has come to this sector since Mossadegh Malik has come in, and he's done a great job of connecting with Azerbaijan and the Russian oil deal, and a lot of stability has come to this area. Last thing I would say on collecting our tariffs, and unfortunately, it is the governmental and semi-governmental institutions that are actually failing to pay their dues. So, for example, a government institution, a government hospital, would just not pay its dues. A police station, because it's a government entity, would just not pay its its electricity dues, because they're like, okay, well, we don't need to. Unfortunately, the taxpayer then has to turn around and bail them out. So rather than all these other things, if the government itself starts paying its dues, our line losses will be halved at least.
So how to address this particular thing?
We can only try and bring attention to this. Many times it's a lot of efficiencies need to be created in our system, and there is a lot of don't hurt this institution's feelings. But I think a lot of efficiencies are coming this way, and hopefully things will be better. And that is one area where IMF could have helped us a little bit more, because every time someone comes in, IMF just gives a broad guidance, and then the government or whosoever is in the power ends up losing their own political capital. So it was an amazing opportunity for the IMF to say, no, we are the ones who are dictating the country to do that. So that was my hope as I saw the IMF saga unfold.
Right, Mr. Ali Salman, your understanding regarding, as Mr. Shikoh Atif has mentioned, the government institutions, for example, the police station or the government hospitals, is that a factual thing that they deny to pay up their dues?
Well, I broadly agree with this observation. I think the significant part of the uncollected bills in the electricity market owes to the government agencies or other departments which have failed. But I also indicated other sectors which government has protected. One way of protection, or one way of one reason of the loss is that some of the discos are profitable and most of them are not. and but the formula, the electricity rate has to be uniform across the country, except the Karachi Electric, which has to negotiate separately with NEPRA. So it means that if a customer of electricity in Lahore might have to pay for the line losses in, let's say, Hyderabad or in tribal areas. So that's how the system works. So essentially we have centralized all the losses. If we change the system to a decentralized one, in which the companies, the distribution companies, let's say Tesco in tribal area, or HESCO in Hyderabad or in other areas of the country, are made responsible for collection of the tariff, then a significant part of the problem will be solved. Then we also have this policy of protecting the farmers, which are using the tube wells. Now, especially in Balochistan, these tube wells consume significant part of electricity. Now, the alternative is, which I'm very pleased to share, that the government has announced measures, fiscal measures, to convert those tube wells on solar power. So that's the solution. But currently, it's not there. So government has absorbed the cost of providing subsidized water to farmers in parts of the country. So that all comes into the bad debts or the losses and the kind of the problems which you have highlighted.
Right. Earlier you mentioned the state-owned enterprises and the privatization of those. So what's your view of the impediments in that regard?
Well, there are major impediments. So one is the fact that how they are organized. Currently, all SOEs there are about 200 plus SOEs currently, and out of them, about 90 plus are commercial and others are non-commercial in nature. But all SOEs are under some kind of ministry. So they are not under a central sort of authority. Unless those SOEs are in the active privatization list, then they are placed under Privatization Commission. But otherwise, they are under ministry, let's say Ministry of Commerce or Ministry of Petroleum, which means that the ministries, the secretaries of the ministries, have very strong incentive to keep those SOEs under their control, because that's a job creation tool, that's a job distribution tool for them. So they do not want to let it go.
But as you already mentioned that when we talk about Pakistan People's Party and PMLN, they had been pro-privatization, so they had been carrying out this particular process in the past also.
Particularly, I think from 1990s to 2005 or 6, we see successive governments changes, but none of the government stopped privatization until the Supreme Court, the decision to withdraw the privatization or cancel the privatization deal of Pakistan Steel Mill back in 2005. That became a kind of a stop. The other factor is the labor unions, let's say in Pakistan Steel Mill, Pakistan International Airlines. There are very strong labor unions which would always protest whenever we talk about privatization.
So don't you think that is going to have a big impact on the livelihoods of the people also who are associated with those state-owned enterprises?
That's right. I mean, if you look at the examples which have, so for instance, one solution in the past we experienced was millet tractors. So it was a state-owned enterprise, but it was given to the employees of that company. So actually, the employees can own the company if the government brings that as an option, as one way of privatization. So imagine employees owning the company with the professional management with some stakes involved. That can be always done. So each, I think, deal would be unique in nature. You cannot have one formula of privatization across these 90 odd transactions. So some will have to be closed down, some will have to be privatized to a bidder, some will have to be privatized and employees can be given the stakes. In some cases, we are just hearing that maybe the provincial governments want to take up some of
So,
the
so when we
burden.
talk about, I seek your pardon for the interjection, unfortunately we're short of time, when we talk about the better governance of the state-owned enterprises and the performance of the state-owned enterprises, there's a difference between the two.
Yeah, I think
So,
one of the
so
key
when we talk
debates-
about governance, it actually already establishes that the state-owned enterprise actually exists. That's how you're going to improve the
Sure.
governance of
There
it.
will be-
So
there
if you're
will be-
going to privatize that, so the governance,
will not be able
the
to
governance the
privatize-
IMF is talking about
Yeah. So
doesn't
I'll-
come under that ambit.
So
Am I
let me
correct?
explain that point. Because we will not be able to privatize all the SOEs, obviously. It is important to establish better governance principle, and one of the key issue is appointment to the managerial positions. How do we appoint managing directors or CEO of these companies, right? So, what is the role of the board of governors or board of directors of these companies? And you know, currently, unfortunately, these good governance practices are not being practiced, and all we hear is the role of the line ministries to control these SOEs. So this needs to be changed to better corporate governance.
Right. Mr. Shikoh, Atif, when we talk about the governance as the IMF demands of the state-owned enterprises, which needs to be improved, so is privatization the only solution to that, or is there any other way the governance of the state-owned enterprises could be improved?
Well, a couple of these areas, what we have done a good job of is we've invited foreign international leadership to come and head these organizations. Now, it doesn't mean that we intrinsically in Pakistan don't have good leaders. What it does is it brings a little bit of an international flavor, and it allows us to partner up at a different level. But the one area which really concerns the IMF is the pension bill of these SOEs. Because that is becoming, and especially now, it is becoming a huge burden on the exchequer, on the finance ministry. So the pension bill. So if it is privatized, that is taken care of. These about not too many more than 100,000 or maybe 150,000 people are employed in all of this sector, and the cost and the burden of these 150,000 people is taken on by 22-23 crore of us in Pakistan. So it really needs to be privatized very emphatically, and what happened with the steel mill must not happen. And the last thing I would say is, when it comes to privatization, we must not let perfect be enemy of the good. There is no perfect solution, but we must get these institutions off of the burden on the common person.
Of Economics at the York University in Canada. Thank you very much for joining us on Skype at Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Ali Salman, Executive Director at Policy Research Institute of Market Economy. Thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. And with that, we come to the end of today's episode. Thank you for watching.